All right, let's start our lecture, and we are going to be looking at what is sub-Saharan Africa. Before we get to what is sub-Saharan Africa, let's take a look at what Africa is. So we have Africa pretty much here, and Africa is the second largest continent in the world. Do not call Africa a country. It is the second largest continent in the world. The only continent larger would be Asia or Eurasia, if you want to call Eurasia one continent. Along with that, in the whole of Africa, there are 54 different countries and thousands of different languages spoken. So this is a diverse group of people. It's not one group of people, Africans. It is a very diverse group of people. Africa is a land like all other continents that have had many kingdoms. It has a large history that has existed. In fact, with humankind, it has the largest history of any continent, because humans have lived in Africa, as we talked about earlier, much more than any other place in this world. So that is Africa in its whole. Right now in Africa, the population is approximately 1 billion people lived in Africa in 2010. That is expected to double by 2050. There will be 2 billion people in Africa. So Africa is going to have a large force is going to continue to be a large force, even more so in the future. So let's break Africa up into two sections. So we got here Saharan Africa, which is where the Sahara Desert is. It's northern Africa. You could claim and make a pretty good argument that this is a much more uniform region. In climate it is. It's mostly a desert region. Many people who live in northern Africa are Muslims. Islam is the dominant religion in this area. Arabic is spoken by many people in this area, not by everybody, but many people do speak or read Arabic in this area. This would be northern Africa, which is a distinct region and is very different than south of it, which is sub-Saharan Africa. So when we're saying sub-Saharan Africa, we're basically just saying below the Sahara. One more thing to go back a little bit, sorry about this, but to talk about African size again, the United States could fit into Africa approximately 4 times. So Africa is a huge continent again. So now if we look at this, if we look at Saharan Africa on our map, we can see that for climate, got one climate, but then we go to sub-Saharan Africa, and sub-Saharan Africa, I see all these different colors on here. They don't necessarily mean temperature. It means just different kinds of climates, whether it's a jungle, whether it's savanna or desert. And there are many more different climate regions in sub-Saharan Africa versus Saharan Africa. Continuing, if we look at this map, there are also more languages spoken in sub-Saharan Africa than in Saharan Africa. We do see a predominant of a lot of European languages. For West Africa, for example, French is pretty predominant, English also as well, along with many other native languages that exist. Religion, there's a large diversity of religion. If we take a place like Nigeria, for example, there's a pretty even split between Muslims and Christians who live there, and many other places throughout. So we can just say, I would make a strong argument that sub-Saharan Africa is more diverse than Saharan Africa. Most of the countries are located in sub-Saharan Africa as well. Now, while we've talked about that there's a large diversity of people who live in sub-Saharan Africa, there is one group that has been pretty dominant, and this group has spread their culture and language through sub-Saharan Africa. Jared Diamond, a writer who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, talks about this. He has a whole chapter of Guns, Germs, and Steel devoted to which he calls How Did Africa Become Black? And he talks about the Bantu migrations is in this. So we're going to look at Bantu migrations. This is a great chart from eduplace.com. And this is going to show us how the Bantu migrations basically happen. So the Bantu migrations, the Bantu are people, we can see they are from Central to Western Africa. And what happens is these people here, they live near the river. This is the Niger River right here. They live pretty close to it. Living near the Niger River, they form a early civilization in Western Africa. And they start developing farming. They start developing ironworking. They have some of the earliest ironworking in the world can be found by the Bantu. This ironworking is used for farming. It is also used for farming and also weapons as well. And if you have farming, you can produce a lot of food, you can grow larger populations. You also have iron weapons, which means you can defeat a lot of your neighbors, which means that the Bantu are then able to spread. Not necessarily just through violent means, but they're able to spread like many early civilizations are able to spread. So we see here, we look at this next picture, and we can see the Bantu are able to spread both through West Africa along here and Southwest Africa, I guess, and over here through more of Eastern Africa as well, and they continue to spread. And we can see this area where they get more land, very good suiting for their crops, which they can continue to spread. This is where Swahili culture and Swahili language also starts to spread. And the Bantu languages spread, and we know that some of the evidence we have of this is there's language, and Jared Diamond talks a lot about this too, where there's many synonyms in words, not the same words, but many synonyms in words that exist all the way from in this area of Eastern Africa all the way up to where the Bantu got their start. Now, think about this. These are language families. So there's Bantu language families, which means people are speaking different languages, but they're from the same language family. Now, if you take Latin, for example, Latin will give you Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, trace their roots from Latin. So many Spanish speakers, and many in the class are Spanish speakers, if many of you would hear Portuguese, you could identify that and be like, oh, I kind of get it. I get what they're saying, kind of. Not everything, I'm missing some things, but I could get it. Like many Spanish speakers, if you'd move to Brazil, in a couple years, you could probably speak Portuguese because you would just pick the language up more easily than someone like me who doesn't speak Spanish. Now, that being said, what happens is in these areas is many people speak 2, 3, 4, 5 different languages. Sometimes they speak different Bantu languages. So again, that would be like speaking Spanish, Italian, and French, and Portuguese. Now, if you knew someone and they said they speak Spanish and Portuguese, you're like, yeah, they know 2 languages. Same thing with the Bantu family of languages. There are many people who speak different Bantu languages. And the one example you'd want to use is Swahili, because Swahili is still a pretty dominant language in this part of Africa. Also, kingdoms start up here. We have the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe starts in this area. Kilwa, which is a major trade center, which is on the Indian Ocean Trade Network, which trades with India and China. These develop in this area of Africa. We're not going to talk about Great Zimbabwe and Kilwa so much in this chapter. More we'll focus on these West African kingdoms over here. So as we can see, the Bantu spread, and they make their influence felt all through sub-Saharan Africa. So many people who are people of African descent, whether you're in Africa or whether you in the Atlantic system or the triangular trade, many Africans were brought as slaves to Brazil, to the Caribbean were the 2 predominant areas, or the Americas, or even Mexico. Those people who have that ancestry, there's a decent chance that you have ancestry that goes back to the Bantu. I mean, quite possibly. So again, we got sub-Saharan Africa, which is the Africa below the Sahara Desert, Saharan Africa right here. Africa is a huge continent, second biggest in the world, has 1 billion people who live there. It will grow. It will become a more predominant power in our society with many different languages, some of them coming from the Bantu in sub-Saharan Africa and spreading. All right, and I will see you in the next lecture.